Hello, everyone. My name is Ashanti Henderson, aka Excel, from the University of Georgia Alpha Chapter, and I am very lucky to be interviewing Coco Nichole,
Hi guys.
author of Sunkissed, her debut novel, and sister of Delta Phi Lambda's Alpha Chapter. She's actually my line sister.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are here today so that sisters and readers can learn more about your debut novel. But first, tell us about your pen name. So your birth name is Courtney Henfield.
Yes.
And Alpha Chapter sisters know you as Equinox. So how did you come up with your pen name, Coco Nichole?
All right. Coco is just my first name, which is Courtney, the first two letters of my first name repeated. And my middle name is actually Nichole. And I knew that when I started writing, if I was to ever publish my work, I knew that I wanted a pen name. And I wanted something that made me kind of sound approachable and playful. And most of the time, authors use the initials of their first and middle name and then their last name. And I just wanted to do something a little bit different. So that's how Coco Nichole was born.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So I think Coco Nichole sounds very chic, like Coco Chanel.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. So there's someone else in your family named Coco, isn't there?
Yes. My dog, her name is actually Coconut. We don't call her Coco, but we do but it's a part of her name. And the reason I gave her the name Coconut is because coconuts are actually my favorite fruit. And I wanted my first dog to have a connection to me, so that's how she got that name. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I know that you're an animal lover, and you're actually getting a second dog. Congratulations!
Thank you.
And so animals feature a lot in your novel, as well as nature. What other things can readers expect to see in your book?
So in my first novel, Sunkissed, which is available right now on Amazon for ebook and paperback, like Excel said, it features nature and animals, actually dolphin shapeshifters, and it takes place in the Amazon rainforest in the heart of Brazil. There's also adventure in the book, there's romance, there's suspense, there's magic for all you fantasy lovers out there. So it just kind of has a little bit of everything. It's just everything that I've always loved about fantasy just poured into one novel.
Okay, so a little bit of everything for everyone. And you said the setting of your novel is Brazil. Why Brazil? Have you ever been there? Or
No, I've never been to Brazil, and as far as like my exposure to Brazilian culture, I've taken one semester at Portuguese at UGA. But what kind of drew me to that environment was the myth of the Encantados, which is what Sunkissed, my novel, is based on. So in the more indigenous rural areas of Brazil, the locals believe that dolphins come out of the water, disguise themselves as beautiful people, and kind of hypnotize or enchant people to follow them back into the water. And so when I started writing the book and using this myth, it only made sense for my novel to take place in Brazil, where the Amazon rainforest takes up, I guess, most of South America is in Brazil.
Definitely. So since you've never been there, and this is fantasy, how much research went into making this novel?
I still ask for advice from readers who are Brazilian. I ask them, am I getting the language correct? Are the descriptions reasonable? And so I'm kind of always researching, but it did not take that long to kind of research the myth of the Encantados. It's a very short myth, so it kind of gave me the basics, but then there was so much that I could personally do with it as an author, which is what I like. I like, some guidelines to follow, but not a lot of limitations. And I felt it was one of those mythologies that was very limitless. Like, you could do a lot with it as an author.
Nice. So one of the things that I loved about your book was that the main character is a girl power, and I can definitely relate. So tell us more about your main character.
Okay, so my main character, or protagonist, her name is Sofia Aguilar. In the story, she goes by Sophie. Sophie is half Brazilian, half Colombian, but she's not very in touch with her Brazilian heritage. She doesn't even know Portuguese. She only knows Spanish and English. So after some tragic turn of events, I'm not going to go into detail because I want you to read it, she ends up in Brazil with her mother and her brother. And because she's so far away from home, she feels very alienated, she feels very isolated, and she goes into a sort of depression until she finds out about the forbidden river that has these shapeshifters, the encantados, that I based the myth off of. So that's kind of everything you need to know about Sophie before going into the book.
Wow, sounds like a lot of neat adventures in store, but these adventures in this book are just the beginning because the rumor has it that there's a sequel and this is part of a trilogy.
Yes. So Sunkissed is actually the first in what is called the Encanchi trilogy.
Okay.
Encanchi is the name of the paradise or the realm that the Encantados come from. So Ashanti is the only one who has read the sequel so far. It's not quite ready for publishing, but it is...
I'm special.
It goes a lot deeper into kind of the mythology of the Encantados, that whole universe, and Sunkissed is really just the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm excited, and I'm sure others will be. When can readers expect the sequel to be released?
I'm not sure yet. I'm still just trying to get as much information out there about Sunkissed. Right now I'm just doing a lot of things social media related, and I kind of want Sunkissed to gain a following before I really start preparing Jade for publishing. And I'm also still looking for original art for the cover of Jade. So not quite ready for it to be published yet, but it's coming. It's completed. I'm done writing it, but I'm still in the process of editing and everything.
Wow, so tell us more about what you're doing in the way of social media and promotion on those platforms.
Yeah. So I guess my main social media platform is Wattpad, which is actually very it's very helpful for up-and-coming writers. And I'm also on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Tumblr, I have my own website for my book, and I'm sure Shanti will provide all that information for you at the end of the interview.
Links will be below. Make sure to check it out, especially her website, guys.
Yeah. So what is happening? And also I'm going to start a YouTube channel that does some book reviews as well as some tips for writing. So it's kind of a little bit of advertisement, it's a little bit of content creating, and it's so interesting, this whole process as when you're self-publishing, because writing is really just the small part. It's the easy part. Everything that comes after it is a lot of work.
So it comes like so natural to you.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually, you're Wattpad famous, right? So tell us more about how you became Wattpad famous, your experience there, and how you interact with the users.
So about a year ago, I joined Wattpad. Actually, when I was teaching at a high school in Georgia, one of my students told me about Wattpad. It was at Greene County High School, my first teaching job, that I found out about Wattpad. So I joined, and I found out that they have this featured list for every genre. So romance has its own featured list, fantasy, and so on. And so I applied for Sunkissed to be featured on the fantasy featured list, and they said that they would love to have me. So that kind of helped being featured. It really brought in most of my readers. And the way that I interact with my readers the most is through comments on my stories. So there's this option where you can do an inline comment, and my more vocal readers will just say, give me their reaction to the story. Oh, I don't think Sophie should trust this guy. Or I wonder what's going to happen to her. Or, oh my gosh, I want her to end up with this character. I want her to end up with that character. And then I can just talk to them. I can talk back to them and respond to all their comments. It's virtual storytelling, and it's actually really, really cool. But that's mostly how I interact with my readers.
So definitely, you probably get a lot of that. So I have to ask just out of curiosity, and people who have read the book will know this, and if you haven't, you should. Are you team Tony or team Amancio?
Okay. For those of you who haven't read the book, Sophie kind of has two romantic interests. One is Tony. Tony is very down to earth. He's mature. He is always looking out for Sophie's well-being. He's kind of overprotective sometimes. And then Amancio, he is the shapeshifter. He is playful. He's charming, but he can kind of be kind of immature sometimes. And I get very mixed reviews from readers who encounter these two characters. Some want Sophie to end up with Tony, some want Sophie to end up with Amancio. Personally, I love both. Well, I created both of the characters, but they both have a special place in my heart. But I personally am Team Tony. That's just
I
me.
agree. I was going to say Team Tony.
I noticed that my more mature, older readers want Sophie to end up with Tony, and then my younger readers, like around the age of 13, 14, always want Sophie to be with Amancio. So there's a pattern there.
Definitely. So earlier you told me that of all the things that goes into making a novel successful, that marketing was the hardest part and writing was easy, but that's more because it's your passion. In fact, you've been working on the Encanti trilogy for a while. When did you start working on it?
So Sunkist in the Encanti trilogy is not the first project that I've worked on. I actually wrote not a whole trilogy, but I wrote about 1.5 full-length books before the age of 15. And by the time I reached the age of 15, that's when I started writing Sunkist. And I finished the first draft of Sunkist in about a year, and then ever since then it's just been going through, draft after draft after draft, with some time of rest in between, because it's not a very long book, but a lot of work has been put into it since I started writing it.
So, did you always want to be a writer?
Yes, I kind of always wanted to be a writer, but I never really saw myself as, I guess, an author. I just knew that I could write and that I liked to write, and then it just came so naturally to me. So I always envisioned myself as, no matter what I was doing, whether I was going to college, whether I had a job, I knew that I would be writing as well. Yes.
Okay. So is writing something that you want to do full time? Because you said that you were doing some teaching.
So as my career is in education, I am a teacher, and I think it's actually pretty cool being a writer and being an English teacher, because you can help kids on that level, and you can help them tap into their creative side, and it gets them more excited about work. But my dream is to one day, kind of, for Sunkist in its form right now, without any changes or edits, which is why I went self-publishing, to be picked up by a publishing house, a very famous publishing house, and just to be, sold, mass-produced, and maybe even a movie. That's the dream.
Wow, so that's your ultimate goal.
That's the dream, yeah. But I mean, realistically speaking, to just, produce the best work that I can and get it published on, Amazon, and get my following and everything like that. So
I'm sure it's interesting to readers that you have a background in education, because you're actually self-taught as well as self-published.
Yeah.
So tell us more about the self-publishing process and why you chose to go that route.
Well, yeah, like Ashanti said, I didn't really have like a mentor to look up to as a writer. I did literary magazine in high school, and that was pretty much the only exposure that I had to other contemporary writers since joining Wattpad, which I've got to meet a lot of writers. But I really don't look up to anybody specifically. I have my authors that I admire.
Like what, for instance? Like who influenced you? Okay.
I was a really big fan of C.S. Lewis's books, The Chronicles of Narnia. I've always liked children's, like, classical lit. Sunkist is actually heavily, heavily inspired by Peter Pan. And let's see, what other authors? Isabel Allende, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I love anything that involves magical realism, and Sunkist has a lot of magical realism in it. Later on, Sherman Alexie, and and William Golding, who wrote Lord of the Flies, which is my favorite canonical text.
So, Sunkissed is fantasy, or would you call it magical realism? Have you always written with this genre, or have you explored other types of writing besides novel writing?
Well, as far as Sunkissed is concerned, it can be defined in a couple of different ways. I just say that it's fantasy just to keep it easy, but it can also be described as urban fantasy, which is like fantasy that takes place in in a realm that we're familiar with. Okay, so even though there's magical things happening in Sunkissed, it takes place in modern day Brazil. It's also considered magical realism because in magical realism, it's a type of writing in which magical events are happening, but people treat them like they're normal. If you've read any Isabel Allende or Gabriel Garcia Marquez, this is very familiar. So when Sophie reaches the town where she's going to end up living, the people there, they believe in the Encantados. They think it's normal that these shapeshifters are walking around. That's an element of magical realism. And it's also a coming of age story on top of that. So, but I typically just say fantasy as the umbrella genre. And what was the second question again?
So Sunkissed is a young adult novel, so I'm sure readers are curious. Is that something that just happened because you started writing the book when you were 15, a young adult, or is that just your thing that you're going to stick with?
Well, yeah. I was 15 when I started writing Sunkissed, and I definitely was writing it for people who were my age. I didn't know back then that was called young adult. And now I feel really comfortable writing young adult. I do also write new adult, which is geared toward audiences that are college-aged and older. And that's that's where I kind of hang out, young adult and new adult fiction.
Wonderful. Yep. Well, I know how refreshing the book is because I've read it. So what is your favorite part of the Encanto trilogy or Sunkissed? You don't want to give away anything.
Okay. I'll talk about Sunkissed in general. I think my favorite part was just all of the scenes that involved the dolphins, because that has a really special place in my heart, because when I was younger, I was in love with dolphins. I was really enthusiastic about them. I wanted to be a marine biologist for the longest time, and that just made me feel really close to my childhood. Anything that kind of and anytime I described Sophie when she was with Amancio in his dolphin form or anything like that. So if you love animals and if you love dolphins but you never really got to read about them in any books, this is kind of like a really great book for you. And I've had a lot of readers tell me that I love dolphins, I love the scenes where Sophie is swimming with the dolphins, and it's really magical experience.
So there's also another connection to this story about the dolphins. You said that a large part of your demographic, besides American, are actually Filipinos. Mm-hmm. Why is that?
When I joined Wattpad, I learned that a large portion of the Wattpad community is from the Philippines, and they do read books in English, and they also read books in Tagalog,
yeah,
okay. And so I had a lot of them contacting me, telling me I grew up on these stories when I was a kid, like, oh, my grandma used to tell me about the Encantados, and I'm sitting here like, I thought this was a Brazilian legend, but as it comes to find out, there's actually a version of the Encantado legend in Filipino culture. They're called Encantos, and so that was just really cool, just like connecting with readers that come from this really unique culture, and them telling me that, you know, I've never seen my own culture represented in fantasy before, and they're lovers of fantasy, and that was really cool as an author.
Actually, a lot of cultures are represented in your story. Can you just share with us a few of the cultures that you featured in your book?
Yeah, so you won't see it as much in Sunkissed, but in Jade, the second book, when the characters actually go to the Encanchi, the paradise world, there are East Asian influences, there are Mediterranean influences, Afro-Brazilian influences, Afro-Caribbean influences, Mesoamerican influences. So I had pretty much a free-for-all. Just like taking all these different myths and all these different cultures and blending them together to create my own paradise.
Yeah,
So,
so
yeah.
I think it's something that a lot of people will also be able to relate to. So now, for the most important question, where can we buy your book and check out your other works?
Well, you can buy Sunkissed on Amazon. You can get the ebook or the Kindle version, and even if you don't have a Kindle, you can get the Kindle app on your iPhone, your smartphone, and read it. And you can get the paperback copy. You can also get a copy on CreateSpace.com. And as far as reading my other books, I am very, very active on Wattpad. So if you look up Wattpad.com, which is spelled Wattpad, you can find all my works, all my ongoing works on there. And you don't even have to join. You can just have the app on your phone and read if you want to. So yeah, that's where you can find everything.
Wonderful. Well, I actually have a copy of Sunkissed with me, and I ask that the author sign it for me, please.
Of course.
If you would do me the honors.
Yes.
Can I read it to people who are watching? Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. So it says, "For my LS Excel, let your light shine forth." Coco Nichole. Excellent. So is there anything else you would like the audience to know?
Well, if any of you guys, want to support me as an author, as a writer, I would just be so grateful if you purchased a copy of Sunkissed on Amazon, and what would be even better, if you left a review for me, because as a self-published author, that's one of the greatest things you can leave are reviews, and I'm actually querying people, book bloggers on different blogs to review my book, but it would mean so much to me if my sisters could help me out by reviewing my book on Amazon or Goodreads. It doesn't have to be long. It can just be your initial reaction to the book and things of that nature. And that's all. That's all.
Wonderful. Well, like she said, you can support her by going to the website or to Amazon.com to purchase one of her books, or interact with her on social media. All those links will be below. Thank you so much for joining us.